Tennessee This Week from WATE 6 on your side starts now.
Hello and welcome to Tennessee This Week. Good to be with you. I'm Don Hudson. Another round of elections is in the books, or at least almost in the books, with some counting still to be done. But let's focus on Knox County. Election day turnout here seemed brisk. In fact, some voters had to wait in some long lines well after places should have been closed. While voters in other communities had high-profile Senate races to consider, Tennesseans were focused on the state level. We kept watching District 90, the state house election there, after seeing negative ads and redistricting. Despite all that, State Representative Gloria Johnson managed to get another term, beating Republican David Posabut. She'd be taking 58% of that vote. Now, during her campaign, Johnson's main focus had been on access to high-quality public schools, jobs, and women's health care, including access to abortion. Johnson says that for her, being accessible, willing to talk to anyone is what's important.
The voters deserve better. They deserve someone who's going to talk about the issue, someone who does show up to the forums. I show up to the forums. I talk to anyone who comes forward. I'll meet with anybody. And I think that you have to be accessible to every voter. And a lot of the voters know me, and they may not agree with me on everything, but they know I'll talk with them. They'll know I'll respect them, and we can have a conversation. And I think that building those relationships, even when you disagree, is important.
Johnson's fellow Knox County Democrat Sam McKenzie also came out ahead. He's the incumbent in State House District 15, defeated Republican Pete Drew with 7% of that vote. Now, Democrat Greg Kaplan and Republican Elaine Davis went head-to-head in a race as well. Davis taking the win with 54% of the vote to Kaplan's 46 in District 18. Another Republican win, this time on the federal level. Incumbent Republican U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett getting 68% of the vote to Mark Harmon's 32%. Now, 6 on your side's Wes Cooper was at the Republican watch party with reaction from winners.
After a few hours of waiting, the votes revealed Republican Elaine Davis as the projected winner for the Tennessee House of Representatives District 18 seat.
Very excited and grateful for the opportunity to serve the people in the 18th District.
Davis, a Knoxville native, defeated Democrat Greg Kaplan. She received 54% of the vote.
The priorities are going to be the economy. It's going to be crime and safety. It's going to be infrastructure, and it's also going to be education. So those are the issues that were important to the people in the 18th District, and those are the ones that are on my heart and mind when I go to Nashville.
Republican Congressman Tim Burchett also projected as a winner Tuesday. He earned more than 67% of the vote over his challenger, Democrat Mark Harmon. Burchett says he was impressed by the turnout.
In this race with just the huge numbers, I think people are angry and they want change, and they're going to get it all across the board, it looks like.
Burchett also says he's got some legislation in the hopper and wants to accomplish a lot in the next 2 years.
Legislation dealing with folks that would pick on veterans or prey upon them actually through internet solicitations and over the phone. It seems that they're hitting them these dirtbags are hitting them at a higher percentage than they are other folks. Those are a couple things I'm looking at.
Incumbent Tennessee Governor Bill Lee taking a landslide victory, by the way, against opponent Dr. Jason Martin, 65% of the vote for the governor. And all 4 of the constitutional amendments in the state passed, including one that puts the right to work into Tennessee's Constitution. It covers whether unions can mandate workers in a given workplace and have their wages garnished to pay union dues. All right, still to come, our panel of pundits, Courtney, Craig, and George. You're watching Tennessee This Week on WATE 6 on your side. And welcome back to Tennessee This Week. We're now joined by our panel of pundits, Courtney Piper, a political contributor, Craig Griffith, our healthcare analyst, George Corda, our political analyst as well. We have a lot to talk about as far as election goes. I want to start, though, with the redistricting, the negative ads. Should we be surprised with those things in mind that Gloria Johnson still won her election? And I'll start with Courtney.
I'm not incredibly surprised. Gloria needed Democrats to come out and vote, and they did. The reasons why the Republicans created a brand new district for her is because all of the incumbent Republicans were afraid to run against her. She is tough, and she is tough because she has a great ground game and she has extraordinarily loyal voters. I talked to her campaign, and they estimated that David Posey, her opponent, actually outside money, not her opponents, but about $300,000 to $400,000 in negative ads against her. So that shows you how ineffective those things can be, especially against a candidate that knows her constituents.
George or Craig?
Well, I think the issue is that, you know, Gloria ran a better campaign. And it's not unprecedented to see a redistricting that doesn't work. A former state representative for Knox County, Jamie Woodson, was once redistricted. They redistricted, this is under a Republican, she's a Republican. They redistricted her to basically cause her to lose. They put a lot of Jefferson County in, and that wasn't her area she'd represented. And she just beat the stuffings out of her Republican opponent. She overcame her Republican opponent with work. And Gloria Johnson's run a lot of times, and I think there were some other factors lingering in the background that helped drive her turnout. Was it surprisingly large? Yes, it was. But look, the only thing that matters is if you win, and she won.
Yeah, and you're right, because it was 58 to 42, you know, thereabouts.
That's not a win. That's a landslide.
Yeah, that's a big time. Craig, do you want to add something there?
Well, no, I think like I said on Tuesday in the pre-election segment was she has a dedicated group of volunteers that would work for her no matter what district she's in. And I think you have to remember that Knoxville is a blue island in a red state of Tennessee. And no matter how much advertising you put in that, on the local level, people see the candidates at their PTA meetings. They see them at the grocery stores. They know these people personally. So that negative advertising isn't going to work that great at this level. Higher up you go, where you don't know the candidates as well, it can be effective. But I mean, Gloria has been in office a number of times, and people know who she is, what she stands for, what she's going to work for. So wasn't surprising to me that she won handily.
Don, if I may, there's a difference between contrast advertising and negative advertising. Right. In every election cycle, there's complaining about negative advertising. But what I see is a trend in that advertising, and that is consultant-driven ad campaigns that just overreach by leaps and bounds over what people are willing to believe about the opponent of the person the ad is supposed to be promoting. And quite often it's somebody out of Washington or somebody out of some other big city saying, this is what you need to do to win. And they don't have to live here after it's over. Now, I don't know who did his advertising, but I know that typically when you have outside groups coming in and spending money to pay for ads like this, they tend to be over the top.
I think George is correct on that. I think those people from out of town have another agenda than the local election. Right. You know, there was some ads that tried to tie a candidate to Joe Biden, and I'm sure Joe Biden didn't have the slightest idea who this person was.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of political operatives out there that do these ads and look at it and say, hey, that's pretty good. I slammed a lot of people, right. and really don't help the electoral process at all.
On that subject, do you think that at this point, at least with her, that the other party would be better off spending money for other candidates? And maybe the same question would hold true for the Democrats to not spend money on certain races, or is it just going to stay that way? Or would it be better just to maybe not spend on places you're probably going to lose anyway?
Well, Don, that is logical thinking. And I don't think any of these outside political consultants are thinking logically. Right. So Gloria can expect more of this, and it actually fuels her base even more, and it makes her base and her voters even more loyal. So I know for her, she's saying, bring it on. My people know me, my constituents know me, and they know this is a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with Gloria is, they might as well leave her alone, because she can't do anything in Nashville. She's a Democrat in a supermajority Republican House of Representatives, and right. From what representatives tell me, she's not the most popular Democrat among Democrats in the House of Representatives. So they could leave her alone. I mean, she'll hold press conferences, she'll issue statements, she'll bash the leadership, but it certainly isn't going to affect the outcome of the makeup of the House of Representatives.
Well, you wonder about the effectiveness of spending that money. Tennessee is such a Republican state that other than in the urban areas, there's going to be very little competitive districts or seats that people can challenge each other on. The Republicans redistricted on the congressional level in the House and succeeded in removing one Democrat from the delegation by dividing up Nashville into a series of seats instead of one large district. So there's not going to be a competitive race there now. So, I don't understand where the money should go.
Right. I'm curious what the public appearance, the getting out there, the willingness to go to a debate, the willingness to go to a forum, because I hosted a couple of those forums during the political season. And in these two elections, in these two races, Posey, he didn't go to the one, and neither did Elaine Davis. So in the one case, Elaine Davis won her election in 54% to 46 against Greg Kaplan. But is that impact? Because in this case, you could say, well, it certainly didn't help David Posey, but it did help Elaine Davis to not go in there and get in a fight with their opponent.
If you have reason to believe you're ahead, if you have reason to believe you're ahead, and it is a risk to go do a forum or something along those lines, then no, you're not going to do it.
Courtney?
Yes, I completely agree with George, and it also depends on the candidate. Some candidates do not perform well in a public setting at all, and the less people see of them, the better. And so sometimes candidates make that decision too. A lot of times these forums, you're not having a whole lot of people that are going there who can actually vote for you who are undecided. A lot of times the people that go here they've already made up their mind who they're voting for. You could probably count on one hand the number of people in the room that might truly be undecided. So oftentimes the candidate's saying, okay, well, if I made phone calls or knocked on doors or did something else, I could reach more voters in that hour.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they're better off knocking on doors than sitting there, because mainly the people at these debates are staff and friends of the candidates. Very few, just voters there trying to look for information. Right. And so, it sounds good for the democratic process to have a discussion of the issues, but if you think you're leading, why bother?
Right. Let me wrap up this talking about the local elections. Representative Eddie Manis left a long goodbye note on Facebook. I don't know if you read the whole thing. It hit on a lot of, including how he hopes Elaine Davis handles issues and how she votes, as well as peeling back some of the covers on the state GOP. I'm curious what you thought, and people can then go read it on their own on his Facebook page, what you thought about what he said.
I think that there's an old saying that if you're explaining, you're losing. And I think all he should have said was, I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve. Thank you. And I wish my successor the best. I thought he will ultimately wish he hadn't gone in. Everybody else is responsible for all of his problems, and I don't think that was the best idea for him to do.
I disagree. Eddie Manis gave us an insight into the Republican Party, especially at a state and a local level. And what we found out is there's not room for a moderate and there's not room for a gay man in that party. It's not an inclusive party. And so I was grateful that he was honest and candid with his constituents, with his followers, with his voters, with Knox County, and with East Tennessee, because it gave us an inside look into the intolerance that is in the Republican Party. No, into the intolerance in the Republican Party. George, they came after him because he was gay.
And they came after him in part because he was voting against Republican caucus position.
A lot of them were
which were anti-gay.
Correct. Which were anti-gay, and he was not going to vote against those.
Well, then fine. You go, you cast your vote, you agree, you disagree, and then if you don't like it, you leave. And then you say, you know what? I couldn't agree with them, but I'm glad to have served. You don't go through this lengthy sob story, in effect, about how you were so mistreated.
But George, I mean, it was valuable insight into how
if you're a Democrat, it was valuable insight.
No, it was, because he said, look, a lot of these bills were against kids, and he said, I've got to think about those kids that are gay or they're coming out, and how these things will make them feel, and how it will make their lives either harder, easier,
well, if he felt that strongly about it, Courtney, he should have fought to be reelected.
Yeah. That's a good point, but we'll wrap up that point. Let people go to Facebook, let them read his comment, make their own decisions. We want to talk about early voting trend versus day of voting elections, also about the national elections. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with much more. And welcome back to Tennessee This Week. Again, our political pundits are here with us. I want to talk about early voting. It's certainly the trend. I'm just going to use one race as example, like the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee. The percentage of his votes, 56 were early voting, 44% of his votes were on election day. And that's pretty standard for everybody who ran in the state of Tennessee and other places. Early voting, is that going to just continue to grow? Or do you think that it's going to kind of balance itself out? Courtney, we'll start with you.
It'll continue to grow as more and more people seemingly are interested in voting and want to vote. They're going to take every opportunity they can to make sure they vote and spend the least amount of time in line voting. And that's taking advantage of early voting because you have a number of days to vote rather than one day to vote.
Can I throw in another part of this? Democrats by far vote early compared to Republicans. For some reason, they want to vote the day of. At least it seems that way. Does anyone have any insight on why that might be?
Well, I think the whole one of the issues here is the Stop the Steal campaign has cast doubts on any form of voting other than the day of voting. And in Knox County, you had a much larger day of voting turnout. And in a midterm election like this, it skews an older electorate. And I think the older electorate has taken the issues with early voting and absentee voting seriously, and now think that the only way their vote will be registered correctly is if they vote on the day of. So I usually for the past elections, early voting has been the largest precinct. More than half of the people generally vote early. And I don't know if that trend is going to continue when we have these issues regarding election integrity.
But even now, you're seeing them counting the votes that came in that day, and at least like in Arizona and Alaska and Georgia, they were taking forever, or at least in two of those states, they're still counting day of voting.
Well, you take Arizona, for example. Now, an absentee ballot now has to be viewed by 2 election commission people for the match the signatures, and then it has to go to a board of canvassing, which is a bipartisan group of 5 people that examine the ballot to make sure that it's official and legitimate, and that takes a lot of time. And
also, sorry, continue, Craig.
Well, it just takes a lot of time and slows down the process.
Also, we're moving to paper ballots. A lot of counties are moving to paper ballots, and those things take longer to tabulate versus a digital version.
People do what they're comfortable doing. And if they grew up voting on election day, you're probably going to find most of them, it's a tradition for them. And with early voting, it's simply something that's easier. And the more people that find it easier, the more people are going to vote early.
Talking about the election itself, some people said there was going to be a red wave. Some people didn't say there would be a red wave. Some people are calling it a red trickle, whatever they want to call it. Now that we kind of see it playing out, it appears at the time of this taping that the Republicans will control the House. The Senate might be Democrats, might be Republicans. We don't know. What changes as far as national politics with President Biden, with approaches, with bills? Has anything really changed based on what we just saw?
Yeah, there will be screaming, and there will be attacking. There will be investigations, but this time there will be Republicans doing it to Democrats in the House as opposed to the other way around.
You mean hearings, like hearings?
Yeah, hearings, investigations, and charges, and vetoes, and all of that stuff. And you know, in point of fact, if Republicans get the majority, it will be the 10th Congress, 10th of the last 14 Congresses in which Republicans have had the majority in the House of Representatives. And they went 40 years from 1954 to 1994 without holding one majority. So the Republicans have actually, since the Bill Clinton midterm, done extraordinarily well in the House as opposed to historically. And 2 years ago, when Joe Biden won with 7 million votes over Trump, the Democrats were estimated to be picking up 20 to 30 seats, and they lost 13. So there's a dynamic going on out there that transcends traditional voting patterns.
Well, and here's what it is. I don't think pundits have sufficiently given President Biden and the Biden administration their credit. President Biden has had the most successful midterm results in the last 40 years.
Biden didn't have a thing to do with this.
He's at the
Biden
top of the
did not have a
tickets.
thing to do with this.
He did, and let me tell you why. Okay, everybody's dogging President Biden. He's old. He's not doing anything. Blah 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 blah. And he lost. He had the best performing midterm election out of any president in the last 40 years. Better than Carter. Better than Reagan. Better than Clinton. Better than Bush. Better than Trump.
They weren't voting for Biden.
He also has passed sweeping bipartisan pieces of legislation that Democrats have been trying to push through for the last 20 plus years.
75% of Democrats don't want Biden to run for re-election.
But wait, there's more, George. Where Democrats especially where Democrats did especially well is people who were not approving of President Biden pulled the lever for Democrats. So by all stretches of the imagination, the Biden administration is not getting credit for the sweeping successes they have had.
Do you give Biden blame for the Democrats losing seats when he won his election? No, of course you don't. So look.
He wasn't president yet.
No, he just won by 7 million votes and his party lost seats in the House. There's something to be said about that as well. The reason I think Republicans did not get the wave that everybody was thinking about is because there was a variable in this race that is transcending politics in our country. And it is going to do great damage to the Republican Party down the road unless they figure out a way around it. I think what happened in this race, in a lot of these elections, where Republicans expected to win, is that people came out to vote against who they thought were Donald Trump surrogates, against people that Trump had endorsed. The people who voted against Trump in 2020, a lot of them showed up. He endorsed Oz. He endorsed Zeldin in New York. He endorsed, I can't remember her name, in Michigan. They all lost. And I think what's happening here is there is a move of people who said, I don't like, and I don't need people who are beholden to Donald Trump. And they came out in 2020 to vote against him. And I think they came out to vote against Republicans who seemed to have Trump's stamp of approval, and that trickles down through the ballot.
Now I think that sets up the biggest political theater we're going to have in 2023 is the battle between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis for who's going to be the nominee for the president in the next cycle. I mean, Donald Trump has already bestowed him a nickname in Ron Sanctimonious, which shows you that he considers him a serious contender for his position. So, I think there are a lot of people that think that the problems were because Trump was so active in this election. Now, the GOP leadership in Washington did tie this election to Joe Biden. Yeah, they wanted it to be a referendum on Joe Biden's policies.
And it was not.
Being
more a referendum on Donald Trump.
Right.
Exactly.
So we'll have to
it sucks up every bit of oxygen in the room.
Yeah.
And the best thing Democrats have going for them in 2024 would be if Trump runs. And the best thing Republicans have going for them in 2024 is if Biden runs. And this choice that the American people are going to be presented with, if it winds up with that choice.
Okay.
How did we do that out of 330 million people?
I think actually that DeSantis will be the Republican nominee.
Well, if Trump runs as a third party, then
nobody want to give President Biden credit.
Trump will run as a third party.
All right.
He'll run as a third party, and
Biden wins.
Yeah, and that was going to be my last question. If you think Biden will run, if you think Trump will run, or DeSantis will be the thing. But since we just got a little flavor of all that, we'll wrap it up with that. We can always talk about that for the next week or the weeks down the road.
Or the next year.
Or the next year. We have a long time to talk about it. I want to thank our political pundits for stopping by, for having a healthy debate about all this. We want to thank you for watching Tennessee This Week, and we'll see you next week.
The views of guests on Tennessee This Week are their own and do not represent the views of WATE 6 on your side or Nexstar Broadcasting.